Good morning. When I was younger, if I was ill and both my parents were working, one of my grandmothers would look after me who lived close. And I'm old enough that VHS videos were still a thing, and they still had a VHS videos, and they had a recording from a film that had been on TV of The Prince and the Pauper, and this film I was a little bit obsessed with. I don't know why. I don't even know if it was a particularly good film at the time, but this was a adaptation of Mark Twain's 1881 book. And the principle of this book is that there are two boys who look exactly like each other. They're complete doppelgangers. One is supposed to be Prince Edward, the son of Henry VIII, and the other is a boy who lives in the slums called Tom Canty. And Tom always wanted to be the prince, and he sneaks into the palace somehow, and the prince and Tom meet, and they think it would be hilarious if they swap places. Unfortunately, particularly for the prince, he gets thrown out of the palace and has to live in the slums, and Tom lives as a prince. But as part of the story, that both characters find it hard to adjust. While they look like each other on the outside, they're very different on the inside. Their experiences are very, very different. They find it hard to adjust. In the end, and spoiler alert in case you've not read a book from 1881, it gets to the point where Henry VIII passes away and there's the coronation, and Tom Canty is going to be crowned the prince, and he recounts his crown, and Prince Edward is crowned and the rightful prince gets the throne. But while they look like each other, on the inside, they're very different. When we talk about the idea of that we should look like Jesus, we should mimic Jesus, it's not just looking like him on the inside, it's an internal transformation to look like the person of Jesus, embody everything that Jesus embodied. When Jesus is asked what is the greatest of all the laws, he distills it down into 2 verses. He distills 39 books into 2 verses. He distills 929 chapters into 2 verses. He distills 23,145 verses into 2. And depending on your translation, he distills 594,490-ish words into 2 verses. And those verses are to love God with all our heart, mind, body, and soul, and to love others as ourselves. The key word there is to love. We see in 1 John 4 that God is love. God is the source of love. God is the one who first loved us and reaches out to us in his love. And our response, Jesus sums up, is then to love God completely and love people completely. We are to reflect that love back to God, and we are to reflect that love to others. The Christian commentator Phil Moore says, love isn't just part of the Christian life, it is the Christian life. So this morning we're going to talk about living with God and living for God. Living with God and living for God. So who is this God? We've already thought that God is love, but also this God is holy. This God is completely set apart. He's the God who is outside of creation. He's the God who is above all things. He is the God far beyond our understanding. He is distinct and set apart. And he is also the God who cannot be near any of the corruption and impurity that has crept into the world. But he's also the God who wants to dwell and be with his people, who aches for them, and his love wants to reach out to them. Throughout Leviticus 19, when it says, God reminds them, I am the Lord your God. It is shorthand for him saying, remember who I am. Remember the things I've done for you. He's the God who has liberated them from Egypt. He's the God who went before them in fire and cloud. He's the God who came on top of the mountain in a cloud and a storm, and the God who is dwelling with them in the tabernacle. He is the holy God who wants to be with his people, but the lack of holiness in the people, their natural state, is holding the people back and keeping a distance between them. And we still have the same God who wants to be close to us, but we still have that holiness problem, that our natural position isn't to be like him. But God calls us to be holy as he is holy. When we're living for God, we are to be holy as he is holy. It's kind of if there could be a shorthand motto or a tagline for Leviticus itself, it would be holy because I am holy. Now, many of the sources that I read leading up to this talk about how holiness is elusive and hard to define precisely. But we'll see if we can do our best this morning. I have been enjoying the most recent series of Clarkson's Farm. Anyone else been watching that? A few hands, not fully raised. Is there some shame in watching Clarkson's Farm? Yeah, some people nodded there as well. Yeah. Anyway, I'll say it proudly. I've enjoyed Clarkson's Farm, and however staged it is fine, but we see kind of a different side of Clarkson and others on the farm that we may have seen in other TV series as well. And the different adventures they get up to with different animals. And one of my favorite animals that they had were a few seasons ago, I think, were the goats. And they brought goats to clear thorns and brushland on the farm so that they could then graze other animals and use it for other farming purposes, so it wasn't wasteland. But as you may know, goats are no respecters of fences and boundaries, and if they see something they want, they'll make a beeline and try their best to get where it is, regardless of the fence. So the solution was to buy them, the goats, digital collars. And then on an app, you set a perimeter round a field, and when the goat goes over that perimeter, it sends a little shock to the collar, not in a cruel way. But it was quite amusing seeing these little goats get shocked and run back again. But within that defined area is where it has been designated to be safe for the goats. Within that defined area is where the goats have food and they have shelter and they have what is considered for them their best life. And what God does for us is he gives us a perimeter to live in. Not to confine us, to hold us in, but within that perimeter, he says, this is where you find blessing. If you follow me, if you are holy as I am holy, within this boundary, this is where you find blessing. Holiness is the space and the boundary where we are in relationship to God. Holiness is the space where we find blessing from God, not a health, wealth, and prosperity, but where we find closeness and relationship with the living God. Holiness is accomplished by drawing close to God and mimicking him. But we see from Leviticus 19 that it's not just getting close to God and staying there and being in a holy huddle and not engaging with anybody else. The various laws across Leviticus 19 show us that we are to be engaging with the world, engaging with other people. So holiness is accomplished by closeness to God and mimicking God, but holiness is also accomplished by engaging in the world in a way that God has shown for us. When we come to the New Testament, both Jesus and Peter took hold of this idea of being holy because God is holy. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Slightly different translation, but the same thought is there as being holy. And Peter quoting Leviticus says, "For it is written, be holy because I am holy." For both Peter and Jesus in these contexts, they talk of holiness in terms of interacting with God and others as a result of their relationship with God. I'll say that again. They talk of holiness in terms of how they interact with God and others as a result of their relationship. They have a relationship with God, and that then affects the way they interact with God and others. Now, what I don't want you to hear is that this is behavior modification. This isn't do better, try harder, do this, do that, although it may seem like it. We've heard in the last few weeks that the Levitical code could deal with the ritual impurity of the people within the worship space, but couldn't deal with the moral impurity of their behavior. But we live in the light of Jesus. We live in the light of the Son of God's birth, death, resurrection, and life. When Jesus came and died on the cross, when he offered himself for us, he bore all the sin and the shame and the impurity of the world, not just so that we could worship, but he covered our moral impurity and corruption as well. He took it upon himself, so that when we come to Jesus, we can have received holiness. When we say we will follow Jesus, we receive his holiness. We are made holy by him. So when Peter's saying, be holy because I am holy, we are holy because we follow Jesus. We are made holy by his death and resurrection. But also, as well as received holiness, we have habitual holiness, that we are to live a life that looks like Jesus. We are to love God and to love others. We're to live within those borders of blessing. We are to try to do the things that Jesus did and be like him. So we have received holiness from God. And we have a habitual holiness where we try to, and we become more like him with his help. I'm sure holiness is as clear as mud now. But the big question is, how are you being transformed? Do you feel like you have stepped into holiness? Do you feel like you're living in proximity to God? Do you feel like you're mimicking him? Do you feel like you're engaging in a world, with the world in a way that God has shown us to? What is your source? Is it a holy God, or is it the loudest voice that you find? Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. So we live with God. We live with a holy God who makes us holy, and we live within the bounds of his holiness. But what does living for God look like? What does holiness look like when it is played out? Well, the key is in the second half of verse 18, love your neighbor as yourself. One of those verses that Jesus took to surmise the whole Old Testament. Love your neighbor as yourself. It may look like Leviticus 19 is a kind of scattergun approach to laws. Do this, do that, don't do that, do this. But actually within Leviticus 19, it's a collection of laws that are around social cohesion. There's echoes of the Ten Commandments there. There's echoes of how we treat others justly. And these are a collection of laws that have come together to prove a point. And verse 18 is the key, to love your neighbor as yourself. God's holy people were to love others as they loved themselves. In biblical times, the neighbor was not just the person you lived next door to or the person who lived down the street. The neighbor was anybody that you came into contact with on a given day. And anybody you came into contact with in your daily business, you were to love them as yourself. To not steal, to lie, defraud, to slander, and so on. The theologian Mark Scarlata talks about how loving the neighbor in terms of empathy for other human beings. Meaning that when we love our neighbor, we are to love others because they are image bearers of God, just as we are. We are to have empathy for other human beings. We are to love them as we love ourselves. The former Archbishop Rowan Williams says, empathy, that is, the imaginative identification with a perspective that is not my own, is not just an optional extra in our human identity and our human repertoire. It is something without which we cannot know ourselves. Without identification with other, I don't know myself. Loving others is the core of who God has made us to be. We are to love those who are image bearers of God, those we come into contact with day to day. I'm sure you can cast your mind back to 2020. There were an increased number of good news stories. We did need them, but an increased number of good news stories about people helping their neighbors, getting food for their neighbors who were isolating, taking their neighbors to the doctors, befriending people over the fence that they possibly ignored before, sharing. There were people who even went further to set up food banks and other charitable organizations to support those who were struggling. But it shouldn't take the shadow of a pandemic to love others. This is our basic calling. Now, within Leviticus 18, I'm sure there's aspects that we would agree with, not stealing or lying or defrauding people. That's obvious things that I'm sure nearly everybody here would say, yes, I agree with that. But there may be other aspects that we don't quite understand in Leviticus 18, in verses 9 and 10, where it talks about not harvesting to the edge of your field so that you can leave some for the poor people around. For this group of people, this was a system of welfare to support others who were there. This was loving others through the way that they did business, through the way that they operated. And in verse 33, it talks about how they should love the people who come into their family, the foreigners, the immigrants as well. And I'm not saying that this is what our political policy should be with, and this is the political view we should go with. But we worship a God of love and justice. We are called to love other image bearers, and we are called to love and be challenged outside of our own opinions and viewpoints. The danger for us is in our society, it's so polarized at the moment. And we're almost drawn into, if I agree with one policy on one side of the argument, I have to agree with everything else. Or if I agree with one policy on this side, I have to agree with everything else. And the rhetoric is them against us. That's not loving our neighbor. There may be things and viewpoints we agree with. There may be things we disagree with. But our primary and first port of call is to love our neighbor. And then our opinions are formed from that. We face a massive challenge with our online lives, our digital lives. Where we're not face to face with people, where we can say things with some, I can't say the word, anonymity. There you go, came out eventually. And we are, as a culture, we're becoming more aware of how the digital space is affecting us. But it's getting to the point where actually the decisions we make are not necessarily our own decisions. The decisions we make have been inspired by the algorithms that come through. The algorithms that influence our decisions and track patterns and encourage behavior. When we see things that we disagree with, it's for us to step back and remember we're called to be holy because God is holy. To step back and remember that we are called to love others as ourselves. And the question there is, how is that going? I'm also one of these people, when the TV's on, I'm quite vocal. I realized my windows and doors were open last night and it was quite late watching football. But sometimes also watching the news, if there's something I disagree with on the news, then I'm quite vocal at complaining about it, mostly in private. But the challenge for me there is to step back and say, how am I loving my neighbor? How is that informing my opinions and views? Be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. So for us, going out of here, there are moments, there are Bible passages that call us. Oh, I missed the slide, sorry. There are moments that call us to dedication or rededication. There are moments that challenge us and we say, this is where God has called me to be, but I've wandered a little bit outside of the fold. And I wonder whether this call to be holy because God is holy, this call to love others as ourselves, is a moment to dedicate or rededicate your life to God. In Luke's account of Jesus summing up the law as loving God and loving people, he tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it's the one who you least expect. The outsider, the enemy, is the one who truly loves their neighbor well. It's easy to fall into something less demanding. It's easy to think, oh, I could do this, but not that. But the vision is to dwell with God. The vision is to get close to God, to become more like him, and to reflect that back to him and to reflect that to others. So for us, we could live with God, be with him and reflect him, and to live for God and to love others as ourselves. Would you stand with me?